Liebe Geft is the director of the Museum of Tolerance, which is the educational arm of Simon Wiesenthal Center, an internationally renowned human rights organization dedicated to educating about the Holocaust, confronting anti-Semitism and bigotry, and promoting tolerance and human dignity for all. Since 1988, she has successfully integrated the museum's educational and outreach divisions, including youth education, professional training, public programming, exhibitions, and special events. She also contributes to the ongoing development of new exhibits, films, and programs that have established the Los Angeles Museum of Tolerance as the preeminent Holocaust education institution in the Western United States of America, and placed it in the vanguard of changing the role of museums as agents of social change. Please, let's give a warm welcome to Liebe Geft.
Thank you very much, Esther. Good morning. I am honored to participate in this important conference on the future of Holocaust education and to address the topic from the perspective of the Museum of Tolerance, which is the educational arm of the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the only museum of its kind focused on understanding the Holocaust in an historic and a contemporary context and confronting anti-Semitism, racism, bigotry, and discrimination in our world today. When the Museum of Tolerance opened its doors, it'll be 25 years on the 8th of February, the Director General of UNESCO, Federico Mayor, attended the inauguration and challenged us to give new meaning to the word tolerance by educating hearts and minds. 10 years later, the Director General was Koichiro Matsuura. He visited the museum, and in commending the Museum of Tolerance on its accomplishments, he reiterated the charge that education should be the antidote of the gospels of hatred that were spreading across the world. Yet when we look at what is still happening in our world today, we are compelled to ask ourselves, what type of education can we expect to really make a difference? The answer, I believe, comes from a Holocaust survivor. He became a school principal in the United States, and at the start of the school year, he wrote the following letter to his staff and faculty. Dear teacher, I am a survivor of a concentration camp. My eyes saw what no man should witness. Gas chambers built by learned engineers, children poisoned by educated physicians, infants killed by trained nurses. So I am suspicious of education. My request is, help your students become human. Your efforts must never produce learned monsters, skilled psychopaths, educated Eichmanns. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are important only if they serve to make our children more human. Only education that advances human dignity can influence a more tolerant, peaceful world and a more respectful, joyous humanity. In this regard, Holocaust education is perhaps more relevant and important now than it has ever been. As a result of globalization, technology, cultural change, historical revisionism, distortion, denial, and trivialization have undermined the integrity of the Holocaust and raised serious questions about the anchors of personal identity, like nation or religion, that have been the source of people's values. There is a dire need for a clear, coherent, historically accurate narrative of the Holocaust as a unique event in time and place. But Holocaust education is not only about history. Most importantly, it is about the lessons learned from history in terms of values, morality, and justice. The challenge today is teaching these lessons in a world in which it is increasingly difficult to find moral clarity. The urgent need for Holocaust education in the 21st century is conveyed in the Special Policy Guide published in 2017 by UNESCO. The immediate past director, Irena Bokova, explains, in her words, "The creation of UNESCO came in response to the horrors of the Second World War, and particularly the crimes perpetrated by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. UNESCO's goal, as its constitution states, is to strengthen the intellectual and moral solidarity of mankind against ignorance and prejudice and the doctrine of the inequality of men and races. This doctrine had resulted in the loss of millions of lives and included the attempt to murder every single Jew in the grasp of Nazi Germany. The mandate of UNESCO is embedded in this history. This is why education about the Holocaust in particular, and education about the history of genocide and mass atrocities, stands at the heart of UNESCO's efforts to foster peace and mutual understanding. Quality education, based on knowledge of the social and political dynamics that can lead to mass violence, is fundamental to building stronger societies, resilience to violence and hatred. It is unfortunate that many of the world bodies created in the aftermath of the Holocaust and given new language and new laws have failed to live up to their mission. And the efforts of the international community to respond to modern genocides is also not always successful. Still, in addressing the indispensable role of education, in fostering a sense of belonging to a common humanity, to empower learners to become active citizens in crafting a more peaceful, inclusive, and secure world, the authors ask a wide range of essential questions, including, why teach about the Holocaust? What learning outcomes can be expected from such educational endeavors? How do they relate to global education priorities? How to introduce the subject in the curriculum, train teachers, promote the most relevant pedagogies, and work with the non-formal sector of education. The responses are spelled out in a 74-page document which is readily available online. And there's also an extensive body of research and professional literature addressing these questions. Let me refract a few of them through the prism of the museum in the informal education sector. A word about our sector. The prestigious American Alliance of Museums, the AAM, reports that approximately 850 million people visit American museums each year. That is way more than the attendance at all major league sporting events and theme parks combined. That number is 471 million. Museums are prime examples of informal learning environments and play a pivotal role in how we take in the world around us. In fact, the United States Department of Labor estimates that 70% or more of work-related training occurs outside formal training in such settings. Moreover, museums are considered a more reliable source of historical information than books, teachers, and even personal accounts by relatives, according to a study by Indiana University. So let us explore some of the ways that the Museum of Tolerance engages visitors to enlighten, educate, inform, and inspire. Unlike traditional museums, which provide an oasis of calm in a turbulent world, the Museum of Tolerance is a crucible for change, a place where the past and the present dialogue with the future. In order for us to help shape the future, we have to have a better understanding of the past, and hence the strong emphasis on the importance of memory. The imperative for historical memory and its profound influence on nobler, empathic human behavior is reiterated 169 times in biblical texts, and the command is double: Zachor, remember, and Lo tishkach, don't forget, establishing that memory is the moral tutor of humankind. Memory overcomes fears and heals blindness. Richard Weaver, an American scholar, historian, and political philosopher, notes that the problem with society and with humanity is that it forgets to read the minutes of the last meeting. Well, museums are here to remind us of the minutes of the last meeting. And in the case of the Museum of Tolerance, of what happens when we forget our shared humanity and succumb to ignorance, fear, and hate. Museums are the curators of memory, and therefore are the guardians of the conscience of humankind. One of the most powerful ways and most meaningful ways that we can evoke memory is through stories. Stories underscore our shared humanity. They personalize history. They build understanding. They create empathy. An individual story reduces staggering statistics and unfathomable events to one human being with whom we can make a connection. Walk into the museum, and there they are, large as life and full of life, the Holocaust survivors who volunteer at the museum. We are blessed to be able to offer at least 4 Holocaust volunteers who speak as part of the museum experience to everyone who comes to the museum every day. And in addition, a Holocaust survivor addresses every one of the group programs for police, for teachers, for corporate executives in our acclaimed Tools for Tolerance for Professionals program. The survivors courageously share their eyewitness accounts of their horrific experiences during the Shoah. They bear testimony to man's most egregious inhumanity against man, and they're the cogent defenders against Holocaust distortion and denial. Yet they are also shining examples of the incorrigible human spirit and its incredible capacity for faith and hope. I never cease to be amazed at their strength and courage to recount their experience without vengefulness or bitterness, but with positivity and encouragement. Hearing even one story can be truly life-transforming, and it's proven by the tens of thousands of letters that we receive from visitors of all ages and walks of life, attesting to the impact that the Holocaust survivor has made on their lives. A 5th grader in the Steps to Tolerance program wrote, "Before I met Renee," it's Holocaust survivor Renee Firestone, "I thought heroes were Batman and Spider-Man, but now I know what a real hero is." In 1 hour, you did what all teachers work a lifetime to achieve, and that is making a lasting impression on the future of America. This is from a high school principal in Long Beach, California. Every professional program includes a Holocaust survivor presentation, which consistently receives the highest rating on all of the program evaluations. The encounter is very meaningful for the Holocaust survivor as well. Just prior to leaving Los Angeles for this conference, I received an email from Jack Wetter, who wanted to let me know, and here's what he wrote, "My talk today was truly one of the most gratifying and inspirational presentations I've given at the Museum of Tolerance in the last 5+ years as a speaker. A standing room-only audience, amazing interaction between a most motivated audience in myself, and the picture he attached, he calls one of my most special guests, photo taken by Daddy." This is Rolf Gompertz. We celebrated his 90th birthday in December. He wrote to tell me a most moving thing happened after I spoke Friday at the Museum of Tolerance to about 60 visitors. He was so inspired that he composed a poem entitled "The Storyteller" to express his feelings. An older man sits at the far end of a row to my right. As I finish, he leaves. A moment later, he reappears. He is around my age. He comes closer. He's all choked up with tears in his eyes. I wait for him to say something. He cannot speak. What can I say? I move towards him and give him a hug. He hugs back. We hold each other. "Thank you," he mutters. I look at him. Holocaust? I ask. Yes, he nods, then leaves. What had touched him so deeply? I will always wonder, I will never know, but something I said mattered. We are all messengers to one another. We touch souls. We matter. We make a difference. Rolf Gompertz. Museums can use storytelling to share authority, not only as storytellers, but as listeners, providing platforms for others to tell their stories as well. Believing, as the namesake of our organizations famously said, hope lives when people remember. Excuse me. Holocaust survivors have encouraged survivors of other genocides to speak about their experiences as well. And these include young survivors of the genocide of Tutsis in Rwanda, who are encouraged to tell their stories at the Museum of Tolerance, which they do sometimes through drama and dance. Recognizing the absolutely central role that first-hand testimony has played in Holocaust education, educators anxiously struggle with the greatest challenge that we will face in the years to come. What will we do when we no longer have the privilege of meeting and hearing firsthand from a survivor? As has been obviously proven today, we understand very well the power of conversations between Holocaust survivors and the younger generation. There is magic in the room. At the moment of dialogue, when a youngster asks his or her question of a Holocaust survivor and gets an answer, it becomes about what they want to know, what interests them, not what they're told. And so they are learning according to their interests, and that is where the deepest learning takes place. We are almost out of time to have these deep conversations with Holocaust survivors, and if we don't have them now, they will never take place. And so this weekend, the Museum of Tolerance is launching, coincident with International Holocaust Remembrance Day, the Hope Lives campaign, to encourage as many people as possible to take advantage of the unique opportunity to hear a Holocaust survivor while we still can, either at the Museum of Tolerance or under Simon Wiesenthal Center auspices, to arrange for a survivor to come to your school, your campus, army base, an organization, or connect with our virtual programs to bring a survivor in real time to your school or wherever you may be through video conferencing or Skype. As Elie Wiesel said, I believe fervently that to listen to a witness is to become a witness. In addition to the powerful educational dimension of the Hope Lives campaign, it will also enable us to take care of the needs of survivors, be it transportation or meals or recognition events or social events or whatever ensures their general well-being and their dignity. It also guarantees their legacy by allowing us to videotape their testimonies, add their photos and their words to the Witness to Truth galleries, make their stories available to generations to come. And we invite all of you and your extended networks of students, colleagues, friends, family, to help support this time-sensitive campaign, which not only ensures Holocaust education for future generations, but also honors the survivors with the knowledge that their stories are heard and their experiences will not be forgotten. At the same time, nonetheless, we must look ahead and be prepared, and the museum has a program we call Looking to the Future for second and third generation family members of survivors to explore ways in which they can become the witnesses to truth. When John Adler told us that he doesn't want to speak anymore because his memory is not as good as it used to be and he finds it very taxing, we persuaded his daughter Eileen to come with him and help him tell his story. John is still present to personalize the story and to answer the questions. When the survivor is not present, we encourage children and grandchildren to speak, not on behalf of the survivor, but to tell their own stories of what they learn about and from the experiences of their parents and grandparents and how it has impacted their own lives. I attended the last meeting of the Looking to the Future program, and some of the stories I heard were absolutely riveting. Limor, originally from Israel, told us about her maternal grandparents, both of them Holocaust survivors, and her paternal grandparents, both of them righteous among the nations. We heard Angelina Billauer tell a group of youngsters in the museum something that we didn't know. Her grandson was a champion surfer when he was younger and became paralyzed in a terrible surfing accident while in high school. He got someone to build him a surfboard that he could put his wheelchair on top of. He resumed competitive sports. He started an organization to support other surfers with disabilities and injuries. Today they support about 800 of them. And when asked what gave him the courage and the drive to do all this, he speaks emotionally about his grandmother and what she went through in the Shoah. And he says that that motivated him to overcome these seemingly lesser challenges. One of the most innovative attempts to capture the essence of an interaction with a Holocaust survivor, which was mentioned earlier here, is the New Dimensions in Testimony project at the USC Shoah Foundation, which the Museum of Tolerance helps test with live audiences at our museum. New Dimensions in Testimony is a collection of interactive biographies that enable people to have conversations with pre-recorded video images of Holocaust survivors and other witnesses to genocide. So far, 16 survivors, 15 from the Holocaust, including Pinchas Gutter from Toronto, and one from the 1937 Nanjing massacre, have been interviewed for the project. They were interviewed surrounded by cameras arranged in a rig to capture a three-dimensional recording of them telling their stories in a new way by answering questions, over 1,000 of them, that people are most likely to ask. This image is of Eva Schloss, and she's featured in the documentary short, which was recently shortlisted for the Academy Awards, called 116 Cameras. This brings me to another important challenge, and that is the use of technology. The reason why Rabbi Hayer, the founder and dean of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, built the Museum of Tolerance as an interactive, cutting-edge experience is because he observed the limitations of the traditional museum that had been part of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Lots of students came, but they ran past the displays and the cases and the posters in minutes, not really reading the text and leaving seemingly unaffected. Rabbi Hayer realized we need to do something different to engage them, and technology was part of the answer. 40 years later, and dealing with a different generation, it is still true, and most museums have embraced it. But the temptation to use the latest bells and whistles can lead to gimmicky, shallow experiences. Content and educational goals must drive the technology and not the other way around. Technology can also play a useful role in helping students prepare for the museum visit and for sustaining the conversation and extending the learning afterwards. Online platforms and virtual museums can also expand the reach of the museum beyond its walls. With so much information available on the internet, the value proposition for schools and educational institutions has to change. We are no longer the source of information of what has happened, but we have a crucial role in conveying why it happened and what we can learn from it to motivate us to action. And to this end, the Museum of Tolerance utilizes cutting-edge technologies, interactive exhibits, dramatic multimedia presentations and graphic displays, compelling artifacts, stimulating spaces to create a unique, immersive environment that brings the past to life, allowing visitors to become witnesses to history and putting a spotlight on the prejudice, discrimination, and hatred that are still embedded in everyday society. The Museum of Tolerance challenges us to hold a mirror up to ourselves and challenge our most closely held beliefs. It appeals to visitors' hearts and minds, inviting us on a journey of exploration and moving us both cognitively and emotively to discover the truth about the world in which we live and our role in it. The Holocaust section in the Museum of Tolerance begins with the Jewish world that was, to establish the depth and diversity, the long history and rich traditions of Europe's Jewish populations before World War II, some of whom had lived in countries like Poland for more than 1,000 years. Then, carrying with us the passport card of a child whose life was caught up in the events of the Holocaust, we embark on a sound and light-driven presentation through the events in Europe from the 1920s to 1945, fully absorbed in the rapid evolution of events as World War II and Hitler's war against the Jews became one. The focus is not only on the perpetrators and the victims, but on the bystanders, which describes most of us most of the time. Towards the end, we find ourselves in a cold, stark, concrete room, reminiscent of the gas chambers at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and listening to actual testimonies like this one.
On August 22nd, 1942, a German officer, Kurt Gerstein, boarded the express train from Warsaw to Berlin. There he confessed to a Swedish diplomat, Baron von Utter, the terrible burden that he was carrying and that he would later write about. I was invited to accompany SS General Otto Globachnik and SS Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Pfannenstiel, professor of hygiene at Marburg University, to witness the gassing of Jews at Belzec. We watched the arrival of the transport, some 6,000 people arriving in 45 cattle cars from Lemberg, Poland. When the doors opened, the Jews were driven by whips to a central place. A loudspeaker then gave the following instructions: strip even artificial limbs and glasses. Hand all money and valuables in at the valuables window. Women and young girls are to have their hair cut in the barber's hut. As the people began undressing, a tall SS man called out to them in a loud minister's voice, "Nothing is going to hurt you. Just breathe deep and it will strengthen your lungs. It is a way to prevent contagious disease. It's a good disinfectant." Many asked him what was going to happen, and he answered, "The men will be going to work to build houses and streets. The women won't have to do that. They will be busy with housework and in the kitchen." As they were driven towards the gas chambers, some began to doubt. Many prayed. The camp commandant, Captain Worth, used his whip on many of the victims as they were pushed into the gas chambers. I saw everything and waited. My stopwatch clocked it all. 50 minutes, 70 minutes, and the diesel still would not start. You could hear the weeping. "Just like a synagogue," said Professor Pfannenstiel, his eyes glued to the window in the wooden door. Finally, after 2 hours and 49 minutes by my stopwatch, the diesel engine started up. 32 minutes later, all those in the gas chamber were dead.
Emerging from the Hall of Testimony, we hear the riveting story of the liberation of the camps, which the Allies came upon by chance, and we pay tribute to the righteous among the Gentiles, among the nations, whose stand against evil is a rare silver lining in an otherwise very dark and sinister story. Finally, we find out the fate of the child whose card has accompanied us on this journey. Although the history of mankind is marked and mired by many mass atrocities, the Holocaust is unique in its scale, the deliberation with which it was carried out, the terrible modernity of the gas chambers and the crematoria, which were its principal means. Most of the victims were Jews, but the story of the Holocaust is not exclusively a Jewish story, nor is it a German story, although most of the killers were Germans. The Nazis succeeded in destroying and murdering the Jews of Europe, not only because of their fanatic commitment to the final solution, but because no nation in the civilized world intervened, heeded the threats, or provided refuge from the slaughterers. The import of the Holocaust transcends all lines of race and religion. Its human significance is universal. In order to be relevant, we must also be current and meaningful, which means making a connection to what is happening here and now. Yet we must exercise great caution and sensitivity in any attempt to compare and contrast the Holocaust with other events, always providing text and context to ensure that the Holocaust is relevant without diminishing its singular significance. That is why Dr. Ephraim Zuroff, who is the Simon Wiesenthal Center Director of the Israel Office and Eastern European Affairs, has raised the alarm about the current efforts, particularly in Eastern Europe, to introduce one joint Memorial Day for all of the victims of totalitarian regimes. The Prague Declaration of June 2008, for example, is a manifesto for the double genocide theory, equating the Nazi Holocaust with communism. It has led to the rewriting of history books, false narratives in national museums, and the glorification of people who killed Jews, because Jews were communists. Conflating ideologies and actions that cannot be equated dishonors the victims on both sides. While education about the Holocaust is distinct from genocide education, which addresses the trends and patterns of genocide and mass atrocities more broadly, the fields are interconnected. We can encourage the teaching of several cases of genocide that respect the historical integrity of each event, promote sound analysis of genocidal situations that differ from non-genocidal situations, and consider and utilize clear applications of defining terms to frame the studies. Incidentally, the Simon Wiesenthal's Director of Government Affairs, Mark Weitzman, who represents the United States on the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, helped write the definitions for anti-Semitism and for Holocaust denial and distortion, which have been adopted by 31 countries in Europe. The many horrific tragedies that have occurred since the Holocaust, for example, the genocide of Tutsis in Rwanda, could have been stopped. Like the Holocaust, they did not need to happen. In the museum's newest installation, we hear this familiar voice.
There never was a war in history easier to prevent by timely action than the one which had just desolated such great areas of the globe. But no one would listen. And one by one we were all sucked into the awful whirlpool.
Was Churchill right? If European leaders had opposed rather than appeased Adolf Hitler's land grab, could World War II have been avoided?
Of course, in the years before World War II, Allied leaders chose a path of appeasement and missed opportunities to stop Hitler. The political decisions made in response to Hitler's rise to power serve as a cautionary tale for today. And in this appeasement exhibition, including a very dynamic multimedia presentation, fascinating archival articles, and also an engaging interactive exhibit, visitors explore the historic footage, the speeches, the actual records that document events of the time, and are prompted to relate lessons learned to current events. For example, one of the questions could be, are political leaders today blinding themselves to the true intentions of violent despots? Understanding the audience and engaging them meaningfully in age-appropriate ways is, of course, absolutely essential in every exhibition and in every educational program. The graphic nature of the material and the difficult subject matter in the museum's main exhibits makes it unsuitable for children under 12. But learning the lessons of tolerance must start early, before latent prejudice crystallizes into lifelong hatreds. And so the Museum of Tolerance offers a program, Steps to Tolerance, providing 5th and 6th graders an age-appropriate introduction to Holocaust history, handling artifacts and archives, and meeting a survivor. Moreover, the diverse audiences and the diverse demographics of the students, 98% of them not Jewish, makes it imperative to find a connection with their own frames of reference and make the experience relevant and meaningful to them. And this Steps to Tolerance program is also a very effective bullying prevention program. The exhibit Anne, the life and legacy of Anne Frank, is also a good example. Why Anne? Almost everybody thinks they know the story of Anne Frank. After all, she is one of the iconic figures of the 20th century. Her book has been translated into more than 70 languages, and generations have now read her words. Had she survived, Anne Frank would be turning 89 years old on June 12th. This extraordinary exhibition, featuring items never displayed before outside of Amsterdam, provides an intimate glimpse into Anne's life, leading us to appreciate her and her legacy through new eyes. It's a unique experience for widely diverse audiences of all ages to relearn the story of Anne Frank in her own words, giving us an authentic, honest account of her experience, her ideas, and her vision. Anne was but one of 1.5 million Jewish children who were murdered by the Nazis simply because she was Jewish. The circumstances of her family were not that unusual. Yet she has captured the fascination of people the world over. And she presents, because of this, a powerful portal through which to motivate inquiry about the Holocaust. Moreover, Anne's gift as a writer is remarkable. And through its simplicity and its naturalness, we find a connection with her as a young teenager whose questions and challenges are as relevant today as ever. Who am I? Why are people persecuted? Why do people hate? This could be a teenager almost anywhere today. Most of all, it's Anne's inspiration that endures. For in spite of the extraordinary and horrific circumstances in which she lived and wrote, Anne Frank dared to dream about her future and about a better world. Erin Gruhl, the founder of the Freedom Writers Foundation, knows well the impact of Anne Frank's story on children's lives. In her words, 18 years ago when I began teaching and was faced with a group of so-called unteachable, at-risk students, it was Anne's story and legacy that awoke these students to new ways of thinking about their own and other people's lives. The movie Freedom Writers was filmed partly in the Museum of Tolerance because that's where it began, and Erin Gruhl still routinely and regularly brings groups of teachers to the museum for professional training. Why now? We have to reclaim Anne as a Jewish child of the Holocaust to counter the universalization of her story, which has been romanticized and abused and robbed of its context in terms of Holocaust history, Jewish identity, and anti-Semitism. We heard some of that earlier from Esther. Students writing a book report on the diary of Anne Frank have suggested that the ending ruins the story and it really should be changed. The internet is replete with images like this one, here Anne in a keffiyeh, usurped as the poster child for the Palestinian cause. If you Google Anne Frank bad jokes, a mound of materials appears. The Holocaust is the paradigmatic example of anti-Semitism, and one cannot teach the Holocaust without teaching about what Professor Robert Wistridge of blessed memory called the oldest hatred. One note, however, Holocaust education alone is not sufficient to counter anti-Semitism, which needs a holistic approach including much broader historical, legal, and political aspects. Why Anne, why now, and why at the Museum of Tolerance? As our collaborative partners, the Anne Frank House and the Anne Frank Fonds in Switzerland attest, the Museum of Tolerance can do justice to telling the story in ways that it has never been done before, in an immersive environment, within the context of the Holocaust, referencing the Jewish and anti-Semitic contexts, and focusing on some of the lesser-known American connections, Anne's infatuation with Hollywood, the riveting story of Otto Frank's endeavors through his well-connected friend and colleague, his college roommate Nathan Strauss, to secure visas for America, and unique artifacts like the pen pal letters between Anne and her sister Margot, and two sisters in Danville, Iowa. The Wiesenthal connection is very important too, as it was one of Simon Wiesenthal's proudest achievements to track down the Gestapo agent Karl Silberbauer, who arrested the Frank family and those in hiding with them. Although never charged or punished, Karl Silberbauer, who was a police officer in Vienna, gave testimony that convincingly refuted the common accusations that Anne Frank never existed and her diary was a fraud. The centerpiece of the experience in Anne's room, where an intense multimedia presentation utilizes video projection, lighting effects, and surround sound audio, transforms the space into a digital canvas upon which scenes from Anne's diary are brought to life in a very personal and immersive way. The walls depict the lifelike feel of the rooms and the real activities that took place in the secret annex, as well as Anne's dreams and descriptions of the horrors that were taking place outside. Let's take a peep inside and hear Anne's thoughts in her own words.
We have been pointedly reminded that we are in hiding, that we are Jews in chains without any rights but with 1,000 duties. Who has made us Jews different from all other people? Who has allowed us to suffer so terribly up till now? It is God that has made us as we are, but it will be God too who will raise us up again. If we bear all this suffering, and if there are still Jews left when it is over, then Jews, instead of being doomed, will be held up as an example. Who knows? It might even be our religion, from which the world and all the peoples learn good. And for that reason, and that reason only, do we have to suffer now. Be brave. God has never deserted our people.
At the conclusion of the experience, we are encouraged to connect past, present, and future as we are challenged to tackle the universal issues about which Anne writes so prolifically in her writings, and we leave understanding that we all have the power to make a difference. Even while we utilize appealing and effective interactive technologies, we never underestimate the power of the actual artifact. Youth education and empowerment programs include activities with items from our archives. For example, a letter written by a young woman named Bella. Students examine the letter. It's written in French. They read the English translation. And asking themselves critical questions, they decipher the story behind it. Bella threw this letter from a cattle car that was transporting her to Auschwitz. She wanted to tell her fellow members of the Jewish students group in Belgium of the lies that they were being told and the dangers that they face. Miraculously, the letter reached its destination, a safe house in Belgium. Henri found the letter, and he kept it along with photographs and other documents from the students group. Henri survived the war and came to the United States. He changed his name to Harry Silvers, and he volunteered for many, many years at the Simon Wiesenthal Center until he passed away in 2011 and bequeathed the letter and the other artifacts to the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Multiple opportunities exist for teaching about the Holocaust across all subject areas: history, civics and citizenship, social studies, language arts, literature, law, philosophy, religion, science, music, and the arts. The Museum of Tolerance optimizes all of them, including the use of films, exhibitions, and book presentations in our ongoing, very popular series of dynamic arts and lectures programs for the public. We need to constantly find new ways to engage new audiences, diverse audiences, and to renew interest in the subject to everyone, approaching it from a different perspective perhaps, exploring different aspects of the Holocaust by topic or by theme, and finding new and expanded relevance. Father Patrick Dubois, whom you mentioned last night, uncovered 2,700 sites of mass graves of Jewish victims of the mobile killing units in the former Soviet Union. He told me recently about his experience now teaching the Holocaust at Georgetown University. He finds his students so far removed in terms of time and place from the Holocaust that they are really not interested. So he teaches the Holocaust like a crime scene investigation, insisting on showing the evidence. And he points out that ISIS today uses exactly the same tactics as the Einsatzgruppen. It is sad to hear talk about Holocaust fatigue. Even teachers express feeling tired about having to teach the subject and go to the same museum and visit the same sites again. Father Dubois is furious when he hears this. There's no Hitler fatigue, he insists, and sadly he's right. The lure and fascination of this murderous tyrant and his lethal ideology still excite millions of people all over the world. We're all familiar with philosopher George Santayana's quote that those who do not remember history are condemned to relive it. Let me conclude the way we began, speaking teacher to teacher. Several years ago, a colleague who worked at the Simon Wiesenthal Center conducted some postdoctoral research in Poland, examining the different factors that contribute to effective Holocaust education. There was only one variable that proved to be consistently significant. Do you have any idea what that was? The passion of the teacher. The passion of the teacher. The Museum of Tolerance is proud to partner with teachers and educators in the broadest sense, and many groups of teachers and police officers come to the Museum of Tolerance from Canada. We're very pleased to say some of them right here today. We're pleased to provide valuable resources, professional developments, opportunities, and the brave and safe space for probing dialogue and discussion on the challenges that face professionals like yourselves on the front lines of social and cultural change. I'm happy to devote the remaining time to any of your comments and questions. Thank you.
Give us a sense of how the museum is able to attract, how it does attract university students and how it impacts university students. Because Max, who I've known for a long time, made a very telling comment right at the end when he said all of his letters were from school kids. None from university kids. So there seems to be the switch on during school and the switch off during university.
Alan, you identify, and that is what is happening in the halls of academia today. There is an artifact in the Museum of Tolerance. It's an original letter by Einstein. The letter was written when he was out of the country and was given word that he had become a persona non grata, that he was being expelled from Germany. Luckily, his stepdaughter got to his apartment and salvaged some of his most important documents before the Nazis got there. But he writes in his letter how he cannot conceive of a world without tolerance, and how concerned he is about the lack of tolerance in the halls of academia. And look what is happening in our world today. Universities must be and should be, and we will hear more about this later, a place of free speech and an exchange of ideas. But within which parameters? The Museum of Tolerance has a special course that goes out to all university campuses about having civic discourse. It's not just a matter of that we have the rights to say something. We have the responsibility of how to say them, and we need to understand the consequences of what we say and what we do. We have also had major delegations of all of the leadership of the various colleges, mostly in California, but from other places as well. College faculty do come, and we are working with the student service sections of many university campuses to provide more training when a student comes into the university. But that is a different demographic, and the challenge is very large in that sector. Do we have any other questions? Thank you.
In response to what this gentleman said and you've just said, I'm a book publisher and have done my earliest book. Some of the earliest books that I did in Holocaust education were for adults and senior readers. And there was truly very minimal response to them, although they won prizes from Yad Vashem, etc. But then we started doing books for younger people, for ages as young as 8, 9, 10, and books that I think are known, Hannah's Suitcase, Gabby's Dresser, including one that we're doing this fall, we just did about the trial that was talked about this morning. The response has mostly been extraordinary, that we find that younger readers if the books are told in a certain kind of way, respond to them as one, to the characters. They respond really positively, empathetically to the characters in the book, but also this is new and interesting, and we have those books now translated into 40 languages. And so I have to think that if the kids are responding in this way at a young age, and that can be continued on through the education system, because I think when I have gone to speak at universities, I find some of the same things. The students are very distant. If they haven't studied it with the kind of passion you talk about at a much younger age. For the ones that we do, we've been doing these children's books now for almost 20 years, that we had a signing at Harborfront, and a woman who studied a couple of the books brought her daughter because she wanted her to understand the same thing that she had learned, and that was not a Jewish child. So I kind of want to, I worry too about Holocaust chill at the adult level, and I really do think we're working on a project that's coming in this fall from Anne Frank House, a book based on questions from children about Anne Frank. And we're hoping that the kids will take that to the next level if they do see the importance of it, and then making the connections to what's going on in the world with other issues as well. So I really do, think how important it is for the educators here in the room, continue to, but also go further with that. And I love what you said, all of it.
Thank you. You touch on a couple of very important things. Most importantly is that we're planting a seed. That's all that we really can do. And we hope that it finds fertile ground and that it will somehow find a way to flourish. And as long as that it is there somewhere, we don't know when it is going to manifest itself and to come out. And yes, perhaps a youngster who learned something about it in the Holocaust has started to think a little bit differently about himself and herself. And maybe that's not paramount through the college years, but perhaps when they become a parent or when they enter a profession like law enforcement or education or medicine, that it returns. We received an interesting phone call not so long ago from a teacher in Hawaii. She asked us, is Elizabeth Mann still alive? Elizabeth Mann is a Holocaust survivor. She's well in her 90s, God bless her. We were happy to tell her that she is, and she still speaks at the Museum of Tolerance. Why do you ask? I said. When I was in middle school, this teacher said, it was 15 years before, I came to your museum with my school and we heard Elizabeth speak. And I really think, without realizing at the time, as I reflect back on it, she's the reason I chose to go into this profession and why I care so much about the future. I want my middle school students, whom I'm now teaching, to have that same opportunity. And we happily arranged a video conference through our Bridging the Gap program with Elizabeth and with the school in Hawaii with these teachers, and they could see Elizabeth and speak to her and ask their questions. So one doesn't know when it'll manifest itself, but truthfully, and you've noted this as well, it is a matter of lifelong learning. It's not enough to start young. We also need to continue it in age-appropriate ways. We need to be reminded of it as adults in our various endeavors throughout life, and to continue learning forever. And if we have any role models from whom to learn, look at the survivors who just spoke to us today, who are continually learning and engaging and thinking and contributing. Thank you. I'm told that that's it for this session. I very much look forward to the other sessions that are upcoming. And again, I'm delighted to be with you at this important conference. Thank you very much to all the organizers for your efforts.
Before you leave, I just wanted to thank you very much for your wonderful presentation and the important work you do. Avi arranged for me last year to take a walk through, and I want to hear about the new museum that's being built in Jerusalem. And I can only imagine it when you walk through the shell and you see the potential, right? The canvas that you have there to impact lives, and I'm sure you will. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. I was hoping I could take, Avi, I'm going to hog for 1 second, because I wanted to just mention one point of optimism, because people have been talking about the seed and the impact and what it and how it how students feel about the topic. I am a co-chair of an event with Michelle called Speaker's Idol, and this is my 4th year being a co-chair. We give students in Ontario a quote from Simon Wiesenthal. We ask them to write a speech. It's open to all of your students, and they come, and I am absolutely blown away by the things that they write. These students are thinking such deep, deep things, and they articulate it so unbelievably that when we read their submissions, we are unbelievably moved. When we talk to them at the event and they come and they speak, you can see a complete metamorphosis where they walk out with such confidence. And we feel that, if the lives that they touch, the things that they talk about, is unbelievable. So first of all, the impact that you're having on students is unbelievable. We see it in the submissions that they give us. Last year, one of the students, it's open, by the way, grade 6 to grade 12, and one of the students last year wrote an unbelievable, or gave us an unbelievable speech about her experience she was adopted by a Jewish family, and she talked about the one-child policy in China and how that vision of being a woman in the world and then being adopted by a Jewish family and the impact of the Holocaust, and the depth was unbelievable. So first of all, thank you for everything that you're doing, and we can tell you from what we're seeing in students, it's having an enormous impact. Thank you. And please tell your students, there's still submissions, the date's February 16th for submissions for this year's event.